The Gospel of Barnabas, if we follow it closely, displays some remarkable intertextual encounters with the canonical Gospels. An example is from the fourth Gospel, the works treatment of the wedding at Cana where Jesus turns water into wine, the first miracle and sign of Jesus' ministry in the Johannine Gospel's narrative scheme. In the Gospel of Barnabas, the story comes wedged between two episodes from the Synoptic Gospels, part of the writer's attempt to harmonise the canonical accounts into a diatessaron. Johannine stories intrude at carefully selected points throughout the work. This is the first intrusion. Immediately after the story of the call of the 12 disciples, using the Gospel of Mark as his guide, the medieval Barnabas adds the miracle of water into wine. Following it, the text returns to the Synoptics, but Matthew, not Mark, and gives us a version of the Sermon on the Mount or the Sermon on the Field. The scheme is chapter 14, the call of the 12, Synoptic Mark. Chapter 15, the miracle of turning water into wine, John. And chapter 16, the Sermon on the Mount, Synoptic Matthew. As the author moves from gospel to gospel, the Johannine story is framed by the two synoptic episodes. The major changes made in the Barnabas text are that the wedding, where and when Jesus performs the miracle, is in Judea, near Jerusalem, and not in Galilee, as in John. And furthermore, it occurs within the context of the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths, Sukkoth. In chapter 14, Jesus has returned to the region of Jerusalem, and in chapter 15, the Feast of Tabernacles was near. Pilgrimage to Jerusalem was an obligatory feature of Tabernacles, so the two notices go together. There are strong reasons to think that both of these changes of time and location have substance, and that together they restore the tale to something like a very early, or at least more coherent rendition from which the canonical text deviates. The method of the author can be traced against the canonical version. The changes he has made are not haphazard but follow discernible textual connections which are somewhat complex but nevertheless concrete and plain to see. The author seems to have a very good understanding of the processes of cutting and pasting that have occurred in sections of John's Gospel, and the Barnabas text engages with those processes in some depth. It is certainly arguable that the miracle of water into wine is an account of Tabernacles themes. The Barnabas writer may be perfectly correct to place this miracle in the house of Judah on Tabernacles, thereby restoring the Davidic associations that have been obscured in John's construction. The nature of the miracle and the background to the story, its midrashic character, is suddenly illuminated by restoring this context. As Christian exegesis admits, the wedding in the Johannine story is a rather folksy rendering of the Messianic banquet. Exegetes usually fail to make the connection the medieval Barnabas is making, though, namely that this Messianic banquet and marriage feast belongs properly to the Feast of Tabernacles and its symbolism. The wedding symbolism is Davidic, Solomonic. Tabernacles is explicitly associated with the founding of the temple and with the divine presence as bride. In the liturgy of the festival, the reader of the Pentateuch is esteemed as the bridegroom of the law. Accordingly, the Jewish marriage feast extends over the same length of time as this festival. Moreover, Tabernacles is, in seasonal terms, specifically the Feast of the Vintage, a wine festival, while its living water symbolism has been thoroughly explored in Orthodox commentaries. The liturgy of the 8th day of the Feast of Tabernacles concerns prayers for rain, rites commemorating the Mosaic water miracle, and readings from Old Testament passages prophesying life-giving water for Zion. In short, the 8th day and the feast in general are concerned with water symbolism and water miracles. In the water into wine miracle, the wine runs out towards the end of the festivities. The miracle therefore corresponds to the symbolism of the last day of the festival. We should note the parallels between John's description of the 8th day as the last and greatest day of the festival, which is in John 7:37, and the comments about leaving the best wine to last, John 2:10. The underlying story seems clear. It is a tale developed from the symbolism of the Messianic banquet that had the wedding on the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem, or near Jerusalem, or at least in Judea, and not in the village of Cana in Galilee, as the canonical version now has it. The original story shows Jesus as the Davidic Messiah and bridegroom in Jerusalem, revealing his identity, transforming the old into the new at the Messianic banquet. In the canonical account, the story has been stripped of these associations. It is possible that an astute Jewish reader of the Gospel of John from any era could recognize the miracle of water into wine as befitting tabernacles and restore it to that context. But as it is woven into the Gospel of Barnabas, it opens very sophisticated encounters with the canonical text that suggest a deeper tradition. The medieval Barnabas account presents an altogether credible restoration of this feature of the textual traditions underpinning John. Conversely, it is John's Gospel that shows signs of dissembling, revision, and mutilation. Tabernacles is where the miracle belongs, and the canonical text has moved it. The Barnabas Gospel then restores it to its proper place, and so the work's apparently strange reorganising of Gospel material turns out to contain insights far exceeding what one expects. The Barnabas version makes only a few textual changes to the canonical text, but these changes have wide ramifications if we pursue them further in the Gospel of John. In the case of the miracle of water and wine, the medieval Barnabas has no quarrel with the fourth Gospel about the general nature of the miracle, the reworked version in fact following John's version quite closely in most aspects. There are no major deviations concerning what happened to whom and why at the wedding. Jesus is still abrupt with his mother, as in John, and events unfold more or less as in the canonical story. Mainly the work has a quarrel with the canonical text over geographical location and season. Here is the full passage. When the Feast of Tabernacles was near, a certain rich man invited Jesus with his disciples and his mother to a marriage. Jesus therefore went, and as they were feasting, the wine ran short. The mother accosted Jesus, saying, "They have no wine." Jesus answered, "What is that to me, mother mine?" His mother commanded the servants that whatever Jesus should command them, they should obey. There were 6 vessels for water according to the custom of Israel to purify themselves for prayer. Jesus said, "Fill these vessels with water." The servants did so. Jesus said to them, "In the name of God, give to drink to them that are feasting." The servants thereupon bare to the master of the ceremonies, who rebuked the attendants, saying, "O worthless servants, why have you kept the better wine till now?" For he knew nothing of all that Jesus had done. The servants answered, "O sir, there is here a holy man of God, for he has made water wine." The master of ceremonies thought that the servants were drunken. But they that were sitting near to Jesus, having seen the whole matter, rose from the table and paid him reverence, saying, "Truly you are a holy one of God, a true prophet sent to us from God." Then his disciples believed on him, and many returned to their heart, saying, "Praise be to God, who has mercy upon Israel, and visits the house of Judah with love, and blessed be his holy name." As the reader can see, it is not very different to the canonical version. It is simply a medieval rendering of the same, with some of the differences clearly explanatory interpolation and paraphrasing. The final section, though, "Then his disciples believed on him," is an expansion on, or a replacement for, John 2:11. This was the first of the signs given by Jesus. It was given at Cana in Galilee. He let his glory be seen, and his disciples believed in him. Whereas the Gospel of Barnabas has, "Then his disciples believed on him, and many returned to their heart, saying, Praised be to God, who has mercy upon Israel, and visits the house of Judah with love, and blessed be his holy name." In the canonical text we note this first miracle and sign is emphatically at Cana in Galilee rather than at some unnamed location during a Jerusalem leg of Jesus' journeys, as the medieval Barnabas has it. The medieval author presents a roughly canonical version with an expanded ending, but has given a whole different geographical location with a festive context. The two texts are concerned about the contending claims of Galilee and Jerusalem. While the canonical text insists that the miracle occurred in Cana in Galilee, the Gospel of Barnabas, in the corresponding expansion, insists on the mention of both Israel and Judah. Compare, it was given at Cana in Galilee to, blessed be God who has mercy upon Israel and visits the house of Judah. Barnabas resists the canonical text and moves the location to Jerusalem in defiance of the canonical text. It is important for the medieval author to show that Jesus performed this miracle in the house of Judah and not in Galilee. Conversely, it is important to the author of the fourth Gospel to show that this first sign occurred in Galilee and not elsewhere. The beginning, when the Feast of Tabernacles was near, in Barnabas, reveals the work to be participating in a debate found in other parts of John's Gospel. While its insertion of the miracle of water and wine is in violation of John's text, and John's version does not begin thus, the wedding is not associated in any way with tabernacles in John. This beginning is from John's Gospel, although in another section. We are carried to John 7:2, which reads, "But when the Jewish festival of tabernacles was near, Jesus' brothers said to him, 'You ought to leave here and go to Judea, so that your disciples may see the miracles you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world.' For even his own brothers did not believe in him. Therefore Jesus told them, 'The right time for me has not yet come. For you any time is right. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify that what it does is evil. You go to the feast. I am not going up to this feast, because for me the right time has not yet come.' Having said this, he stayed in Galilee. However, after his brothers had left for the feast, he went also, not publicly, but in secret." The Gospel of Barnabas signals a link between the two episodes, importing the beginning of John 7:2, when the Feast of Tabernacles was near, into the miracle of water and wine. It therefore invites us to read the miracle along with and in light of this section beginning when the Feast of Tabernacles was near in John 7. It's a simple cut and paste, but immediately revealing. An attentive reading of John 7 illuminates the nature of the debate. The issue in this passage, John 7:2, is where Jesus should perform his miracles, Galilee or Jerusalem. In the canonical text, Jesus' brothers urge him to go to Jerusalem and do there, for his disciples, what he's been doing in Galilee, presumably for his family. Jesus does go to Jerusalem, but not with his brothers. He remains secret. There are tensions in this passage between Galilee, Jerusalem, brothers, disciples, private, public. These are the tensions with which the Gospel of Barnabas engages. In terms of the parties described in the fourth Gospel, the sympathies of the medieval Barnabas are with Jesus' brothers. In John, they urge Jesus, "You ought to leave here and go to Judea so that your disciples may see the miracles you do." In the Gospel of Barnabas, when Tabernacles is near, we find Jesus doing exactly this. He is in Judea, showing his miraculous powers to his disciples. There is no reluctance concerning the Feast of Tabernacles in the Barnabas Jesus. He is in Jerusalem at festive time, not home in Galilee. He performs a miracle at a public event, a wedding, and it is his disciples who are with him. In the Gospel of Barnabas, the occasion of the Feast of Tabernacles means quite naturally that Jesus is in the region of Jerusalem where, at the outset of his ministry, he openly displays his miracles at a public event. In these sections of John's Gospel, in contrast, the house of Judah is a house of strife. John 7:1, just before this passage, announces the theme with Jesus stayed in Galilee. He could not stay in Judea because the Jews were out to kill him. The fourth gospel wants to show Jesus as a Galilean, first and foremost, and Judea, with its Jews, as a place of danger, hostility and opposition. The wedding is in Cana because Cana is in Galilee, and it is to the Galileans, according to John, that Jesus presents his first sign, the water changed into wine. He let his glory be seen, John 2:12. The Gospel of Barnabas disagrees. The wedding, it says, was in Judea at Tabernacles, responding exactly to the urging of Jesus' brothers in the fourth Gospel. The Barnabas Jesus demonstrates the living water that flows through Johannine symbolism to his disciples in the house of Judah. The issue is, where did Jesus first declare himself in public? Where was his first sign? The canonical text is anxious to place this event in Galilee, in a small village wedding among kin and neighbours, and to show Jesus to be reluctant to show himself in Jerusalem at the great public assembly of tabernacles. Contra John, the Gospel of Barnabas depicts a Jewish Jesus who declares himself to the house of Judah at the time of the nation's feast, restoring Davidic nuptial symbolism. The connections and nature of the polemic in which they are involved becomes clear simply by going to those places in John's text where the Gospel of Barnabas leads us. Reading on from the locus signalled by the Barnabas version in John 7:37, we turn to the last or 8th day of the tabernacle feast. Here Jesus says, "If any man is thirsty, let him come to me," and speaks of the promise of the living water consistent with the symbolism of tabernacles. This living water is surely linked to the miracle of water and wine, as the whole tradition of Christian scriptural exegesis, ancient and modern, attests. In all Christian understandings, the Johannine wedding at Cana is essentially a water miracle that demonstrates this living water doctrine in action. The theme of the living water links these two sections of John's Gospel. This follows from normal Christian understandings. If the living water discourse, to which the cut and paste in the medieval Barnabas points, is appropriate to the Feast of Tabernacles, so too is the transformation of water into wine at the wedding, which illustrates the same symbolism. Then, at John 7:40, in response to these living water teachings, reaching the heart of the whole matter, we find that some say Jesus is the Christ, but others say, would the Christ be from Galilee? Does not the scripture say that the Christ must be descended from David and come from the town of Bethlehem? Here is the pivotal issue. From whence does the Messiah come? This is the issue at stake in all these textual tensions between Galilee and Jerusalem, and the issue driving many other textual tensions throughout Christian literature. It is responsible for an array of textual tangles. In the synoptic tradition, most obviously, this same tension is involved in the story that while Jesus was born in Bethlehem, he was actually a Galilean. Placing his birth at the time of a census resolves this problem. The sympathies of the Barnabas text vis-à-vis the canonical texts on these matters are plain. It prefers the claims of Jerusalem. The link, when the Feast of Tabernacles was near, takes us to a deeply polemical section of John. The writer of the fourth Gospel has, we know, collected his materials from diverse sources. He wants to retain this particular story and use it as the first of the great signs of Jesus' messiahship. But for polemical reasons, he objects to its Judaic, Davidic, Temple, Jerusalem associations. He accomplishes his revision by removing it from its tabernacle context. It had perhaps once accompanied the living water materials now in John 7, its specific context being the last and greatest day of tabernacles, John 7:37. The overwriting in John's Gospel is plain to see, and also reveals the atmosphere of contention in which it was done. Polemical engagement with John also extends to textual overlaps that paste the pericopes in their new locations in the medieval work. Immediately prior to the wedding at Cana in John's sequence is the calling of Nathanael episode. The Gospel of Barnabas has instead the calling of the disciples from Mark's Gospel. It first appears that the Johannine episode has been stuck awkwardly into the Barnabas narrative. It is self-contained and flanked, as we said, by two synoptic episodes, and so breaks the flow of an otherwise synoptic narrative. But in fact, the plan of the Gospel of John has been overlaid with the synoptic scheme in a move to harmonise the two, and so a lot more thought has gone into the arrangement than it at first seems. The full scheme embraces the second part of chapter 14 through to the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount at the beginning of chapter 19. It is a coherent construction of gospel material grouped around the Feast of Tabernacles and its themes, with the miracle of water and wine integral, if not central to it. It is counter-Johannine. In John we have the call of Nathanael, water into wine, the cleansing of the temple. In Barnabas we have the call of the 12, water into wine, Sermon on the Mount. Moreover, the overlapping tab, the call of Nathanael, the disciple only mentioned in John's Gospel, corresponding to Barnabas's call of the disciples, is bound to the above-mentioned configuration in that Nathanael comes from Cana, John 21:2, Nathanael of Cana. And it is Nathanael who says, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" John 1:46, when told that they had found the one Moses wrote about in the law in that place. It is an important point for the author of John. We can see how his gospel is again insisting on Jesus' Galilean origins against the geographical assumptions of the Davidic messiahship. John insists Jesus is a Messiah from Galilee, despite what people assume about the messianic office. We are remote from any Islamic influences here in the Gospel of Barnabas. In fact, the restoration of the Davidic context of the miracle of water and wine might be construed as counter to the whole agenda of this Islamic gospel, which is everywhere else at pains to distance Jesus from any claim to messiahhood. But the Gospel of Barnabas preserves traditions that this miracle occurred at tabernacles, and that the call of the disciples and the Sermon on the Mount belong in the same grouping, all of them being developments of tabernacles themes. The Sermon on the Mount, or the Sermon on the Field, an outdoor sermon, is a tabernacles themed episode properly considered too. In the Gospel of John, we can see the textual marks left where this material has been stripped of such associations. Jewish readers in particular are likely to be alive to the significance and plausibility of this. They have long complained that the Gospel of John and the whole Christian tradition has its festivals mixed up. The Christian depiction of Jesus going to Jerusalem for Passover with the triumphant entry of the Davidic king, singing Hosanna and waving palm fronds, is a depiction of the symbols of tabernacles, not Passover. Jews can hardly recognize the Christian Passover. In the Christian tradition, the sacrificial symbolism of Passover with Christ as the Paschal Lamb has been interchanged or collapsed with or overwritten upon the Feast of Tabernacles. It is notable that the conspicuously misplaced cleansing of the temple, coming immediately after the wedding at Cana in John's Gospel, begins just before the Jewish Passover. Jesus went up to Jerusalem, participating in these interchanges of time and place, and providing the immediate canonical episode for the when the Feast of Tabernacles was near in the Barnabas text. There is quite fascinating and subtle interplay between these two works on this matter. It suggests that there was first a type of midrashic story concerning the messianic wedding banquet, illustrating the symbolism of the Feast of Tabernacles. The Johannine textual tradition has then taken this story, stripped it of its tabernacle symbolism, and recast it as a simple village wedding in Cana in Galilee. It began as a sophisticated theological story. It became rustic and primitive. It is not a simple story that has been mythologized. It is a mythic story that has been historicized and made to seem concrete and based in a common and therefore historical event. The Gospel of Barnabas, in its quarrel with John's Gospel, restores the proper symbolism, time and location. Of the two texts, the Barnabas Gospel is correct and must be the original arrangement. And in a simple move, this most unlikely of texts allows us to unstitch the Gospel of John. In short, the Gospel of Barnabas moves the water into wine episode. It is near Jerusalem at Tabernacles, but in this one change, it engages with complex intertextual encounters with the Gospel of John, which are deeply revealing.